He had been telling the bartender to give up because the bartender had been giving me CPR that whole time and it was doing nothing. And I had gone from pale to gray to turning black or whatever happens, and he just wanted to cover the body. He did not want to see it anymore. So he had told him it's not working, but the bartender just kept going. My first sensation of it was of warmth, just of this warmth that was, instead of on my surface, was all through me. And if you could imagine like warmth, coziness in your consciousness. And then I began to feel, no, it's more than just warmth, it's love. And then I began to feel adored and valued. And my thought was, finally. Because if my whole life had been, we almost love you, if you would just do a little better. Now I was completely loved. And I was so inundated with love that the only limit of it was how much could I absorb. What I felt was, if all the love I'd ever felt from all the people in my life or given was a candle, then this was the sun. It was just infinite. And, how many years have I wished I could find that man to thank him? How many years have I thought about that he gave me my son, he gave me my kitten, he gave me everything, every joy that I've had in this life since then.
This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my guest, Louisa Peck. Hello, Louisa.
Hi, Heather.
I am so glad to have you here. We were talking before we started, and we both have cats. And so if you see them walking across the screen, they just may happen to do that. In fact, for those of you that don't watch to the end, you probably miss Bubbie, because my cat almost always is at the very end of the video, just because he's kind of a camera hog.
And mine is a new kitten. I mean, he's not that new. He's been here for like 3 months now, but he's still crazy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love crazy kittens. They're so wonderful.
They are. They can play with anything.
But of course, we're here to talk about more than cats. We're here to talk about your near-death experience. And this happened when you were an atheist. It was back in 1982 at the Peppermint Lounge. So why don't you take us there and just fill us in?
Okay, I will. I just want to preface this with what I think makes my near-death experience a little different. And my guide, my angel, was telling me this morning that he wants me to let your viewers know that I absolutely denied my near-death experience when I came back to this body, because this body was alcohol dependent and ego driven, and the whole understanding I had of the universe, or that my ego had of the universe, was built around this kind of nothing matters. That's why we drink. I'm kind of a nihilist carouser type person. So when I came back and I was confronted with this angelic other side, I could only think of religion, because it was 1982 and I had never heard of a near-death experience. And I was terrified by religion, really, but I also just had a whole personality associated with it that didn't fit me. So I decided with all my mental might that this thing had been a dying brain phenomenon. So, and then for years, I just tried not to think about it. And I saw a ghost, and I knew the future, and I began to hear a voice. And so it was all of those things that finally broke down that denial. My near-death experience is amazing, and you would think anybody would be compelled by that to change. But I was an alcoholic, and getting that next drink was the most important thing to me. And how can you keep drinking and getting blotto when you know that your life matters? So I just had to say that wasn't real and my life doesn't matter, until my angel kind of like just forced me to see, yes, this is what's real, so I will go into it now. So, okay, let's think back. I looked very different, and I'll send you a picture. I was 22, had a Pat Benatar haircut, and I was in New York City because it was where Studio 54 was, and I wanted to go clubbing, and I worked at a Columbus Ave restaurant as a bus boy, bus girl. I mean, I've never said this on a video, but to get an idea of who I was, my money went for important things like booze, cigarettes, and cover charge. So as a bus girl, I would, especially from the anorexic women, just take their dinner as soon as were done picking at it, throw it in a bag and take that home. And that's what I ate, because who wants to waste their money buying groceries, So anyway, so I asked this guy to come down from New York. He was a math teacher at a private school, and he was also a coke dealer when we were in college. And so I had a pretty good idea that he would have coke. So he did not disappoint. He brought the cocaine. We did a bunch at home in the apartment, and then we did more in the cab. And then at the club, I was finally starting to feel okay. So you can guess, like, a normal, healthy-minded young woman would not be eating other people's food so she could save her money for booze and cigarettes and cover charge. I had a gaping hole in me. I mean, the older I get, the more I can see that my parents had issues and did their best, but I did not grow up in an environment of love. I grew up in an environment of almost love. If you would just do a little better, oh, then we just surround you with love. But right now, we're not real pleased. So I was always looking to prove my worth. And right now, my arena for proving my worth was not academics, which it had been for a long time. It was coolness, and it was coolness at this Peppermint Lounge place. So when we ran out of cocaine and I started changing from Wonder Woman into ordinary, boring me, I was really, really bummed. So we decided to buy some more. We pooled our money. I had a lot of tips money with me. And somebody pointed us to a guy who was supposedly selling cocaine. And he gave us a little baggie, and we tested it by rubbing it on our lips, and it numbed them. So, I mean, not lips, gums. It's been a while. I know you go like this, but it's on your gums. Anyway, it numbed them. So we thought it was coke, and we paid him, and he disappeared. And as soon as we started snorting it, my friend said, "We've been had. This is not cocaine. It's doing nothing." He knew right away that it was something other than cocaine. But I was just thinking maybe it's baby powder. But then I thought, well, then why did it numb our lips? I thought, if it's just bad cocaine, if I do the whole pile, maybe I'll get a little bit high. So I snorted the whole pile, and my brain began to shut down because it was not cocaine. It was lidocaine. I didn't know this until many years later, after I'd gotten sober. I'm sober 30 years now. And a lot of my friends were former drug dealers. And two of them told me that they used to cut cocaine with lidocaine during the 80s. And that the gum thing worked really well for fooling people. The only trouble is lidocaine's poisonous, and it shuts down your nervous system. So if you put it on the skin goes numb. If you ingest it systemically, all of the autonomic, well, basically all the nerve impulses in your body get muted and stop working. So the first thing I felt was that I was, when you're going to faint, you see these kind of speckles around in your peripheral vision. And so I just thought, oh, cool. What a cool side effect. No one told me about this of cocaine. And I couldn't wait to brag about, I saw some wicked speckles, I don't know what I was going to say. Anyway, I got in line for the restroom. And when I got in the stall, I couldn't read any of the graffiti. And that's when it began to feel like it was getting darker and darker, and that there was no air. And what was happening is my heart was succumbing to the lidocaine and beating slower and slower. And it's called bradycardia when your heart dips below, say, 30 and goes into the 20s or whatever. You know, it may be fine if you're a whale, but if you're human, your brain's not getting oxygen. So I was breathing as hard as I could manually, but I just couldn't get a breath, and I couldn't get it to my brain. I ran out and found my date and told him there's no air down here. There's no air. And I was like, we need to go outside. And he was like, calm down, calm down. He brought me to the bartender. The bartender also took me in, saw that I was freaking out, gave me a glass of water, which was the last thing I wanted. But to please them, because I was, in spite of all this confusion, still a pretty nice person. And I will say that my heart broke for all the homeless people that I saw in New York, because I had never seen anyone homeless before. So why I did not go somewhere down is that there was a basic goodness in me. So when I took that sip, my first thought that was still integrated with this world was that I had somehow slipped and hit my chin on the bar, because I felt something slam me under my chin. But it had the effect of, like, if you're in a cartoon and you get Popeye punched and you shoot up into the air, I shot up into the air, sort of like somebody shot out of a canyon. And I went up, and I could feel Manhattan kind of receding away from me, like this just kind of scribbly mess. I don't know if you've ever seen those animated scribbles. Like, that's how I felt about Manhattan. I didn't see buildings. I didn't see the streets, but I could sense its energy. And my thought was, thank goodness all that's over with. And by all that, I meant not just Manhattan, but me as Louisa. I had this sense that had been an effort that had just not quite worked out. And so I was really just glad to be done with it. I didn't think I'm dead. I just thought that silliness is behind me now. And I guess I'll talk more about that later. I shot up into the sky, which was now, instead of a night sky, it was blue sky. And I was going up, and I began to sense that under me was just the clear blue ocean. And it was so blue, and it was so unpolluted, and it just went from horizon to horizon. And I got this kind of playful idea. I bet I can do a back bend and then do a kind of Esther Williams dive into the water. And I was a ballet dancer in regular life, so I had this sense I can do stuff. And I did the back bend. It worked out perfectly. And I was like, yay. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm like 300, 400 feet above this ocean. Isn't it like concrete when you hit it? And I didn't have any fear. There is no purpose for fear on the other side. So I just wondered if it would be like concrete. And then I went into the water and went way down, and I was like, that sure worked out. And then I could see the bubbles rising around me, and it was so beautiful. Looking up at the surface, but it was way high above me. So again, I thought, am I going to be able to reach the surface? But there were no real mechanics of needing to breathe or any of those kind of bodily sensations. It was more just a mental, shouldn't this mean trouble? But then the next thing I know, I'm at the surface. So I'm like, cool. Then I saw the shore, and I wanted to be there again. And I do remember being a little bit surprised by this when I began to swim towards the shore, and I'm a pretty lousy swimmer. And next thing I know, I'm wading out, and I did have a little sense of like, that happened pretty quick, but fine. I'm fine with it. And so then when I was on the shore, I looked down the coast, and I saw this mesa that rose up from the beach as a single sort of pillar, large pillar, and it had a house on top. And I just right away saw the house. I could tell from even a distance it was very old and weather beaten. And I thought, I want to be there. That house has to do with me. So again, I start toward it. And next thing I know, I am not at the house, but I am at the foot of the mesa. And so I thought, this presents a problem. And not only that, but it was a bunch of rocks, and they were just covered with this gross, putrid slime, a little bit like my shirt colored slime that I thought maybe more green, but I thought it was rotten seaweed, but it just repulsed me. Now, and just to jump ahead, this is going to be my sins or my baggage or my whatever yucky stuff it is that I have built up in this world. I had to climb above it. And I just thought, I can do this. So I climbed above it and I reached the door sill, but I had lost my body in the process. It just didn't come with me. That awareness of body that had done the diving and, the swimming and all these things. I was just a point of awareness and I was right at the level of the door sill. But I had this determination to get in there. I was like, this is not going to slow me down. So I crossed the door sill, and as soon as I was in there, I could see the floor really clearly. And it was so worn from people having walked on it. There was no more finish on anything. And it was kind of almost like a little bit, I don't know, chalky or whatever old wood gets like. And I understood immediately that this was because all my ancestors had crossed this same threshold. Thousands of them, maybe millions. I don't know, but I knew lots of us have crossed this same threshold, and now it's my turn. And I had this huge sense of honor of I'm entering this place, which I sensed was kind of a way station that we all crossed through, that everybody had been there at some point. And I felt so honored that this was my turn. The 22-year-old me who was, chasing Peppermint Lounge and stuff, I could not have cared less about my ancestors. Show me the album and say, this is your great grandfather someday. I'm like, I just didn't care, right? On this side, I just felt that they were noble, amazing, wonderful people, and that I was so privileged to join them. It's hard to describe the sort of majesty that they seem to have to me. And my grandfather on my father's side is the one who had died before me, and he was the one that I could sense was most eager to meet me. He was like, yay, you're here, you're here. I couldn't see any of them. This is all awarenesses of them. So my next thought, though, I kind of forgot about them because there was supposed to be an armchair in the middle of the room that looked out through this big picture window at the ocean, and everybody took their turn sitting in the chair and looking at the ocean and just admiring the beauty. And the chair wasn't there. And so I just kind of, hey, what's wrong with my turn here? Why is there no chair? I don't know why there was no chair. Maybe because I wasn't quite my time. But anyway, I just thought, I want to see the beautiful ocean too. And as soon as I thought, I want to see, then something other than me grabbed me by my sternum, which I didn't have a sternum, but if you just think about where your sternum is, you know where your heart is. And that's what it grabbed me by and began to pull me across the floor. So this floor that's very close to me is going under me. And I'm like, whoa, what's happening? And it's like a ride starting up or something like that feeling of getting pushed forward or pulled forward. Anyway, we went up the wall and then over the windowsill and out. And when I crossed over the windowsill, I just had this exhilaration of, whoa, what's happening? I wasn't at all afraid. I didn't know what was going to come next, but we started flying, or I should say I started flying over the ocean, and the sun was setting directly in front of me, and it was making a path across the water that was like dazzling and golden and just leading right to it like a path. And the sky around it was all these beautiful, beautiful colors. And I was just zooming over it, just zooming. And I was so happy. And then I had a skeptical thought, which was, wait a minute. Isn't this just a little too perfect with the beautiful sky and the setting sun and the flying, like people fly in dreams? Is this real? And when I asked that question, this is when something answered me. And it was a kind of a deep resonance in my being, in my bones, in my thought. And it said more real than anything back there. And it was talking about like the scribble thing I had left behind, which is this life. And I had to think and I had to say, yeah, you're right. this is more real. How did I know it was more real? Because it was actually like happening. Whereas all we have now is stuff happening in our brain. We just have a big hologram of what our brain is the best it can put together. And that place was just the pure energy. And so I was like, this is happening. But then I was approaching the sun and I began to have that same wondering, aren't I going to vaporize? And not fear. I could begin to see the corona on the sun. And then instead of vaporizing, I passed through some kind of filament and I was in the light, which was the core of the sun. And I will say that my atheist father had taught me that we all come from the sun, because every bit of energy in your consciousness, my consciousness, your viewer's consciousness right now was at one point on the sun. And it comes through a food we eat. I mean, other than, I guess, what wouldn't count would be tidal energy or thermal energy from the earth. Other than that, everything on this planet comes from the sun. So I was going to my source. I was going to my maker. And in the sun was the light, which, if you've seen any NDEers talk about it, is I used to cry every time I talked there, but now I find I don't go there quite as much. But it was the sense of being, well, first of all, my first sensation of it was of warmth, just of this warmth that was, instead of on my surface, was all through me. And if you could imagine like warmth, coziness in your consciousness. And then I began to feel, no, it's more than just warmth, it's love. And then I began to feel adored and valued. And my thought was, finally. Because if my whole life had been, we almost love you, if you would just do a little better. Now I was completely loved. And I was so inundated with love that the only limit of it was how much could I absorb. What I felt was, if all the love I'd ever felt from all the people in my life or given was a candle, then this was the sun. It was just infinite, unbelievably powerful love. And I was this tiny little dot kind of floating around, like I loved it, and then I began to sense that instead of being like a dot, I was being held by someone. And I didn't see, all I could see was the light, and it didn't burn my eyes. It was just pure light. And the being was holding me like a baby and pouring this love into me. You are so loved. You are so loved. And knew me better than I knew myself. Knew me from, I will say now, I didn't know this at the time, but all the lives I've lived. And that, I will tell you also, is the guy that was talking to me this morning, telling me to emphasize the fact that I tried to throw all this away as best I could. But anyway, at that time, all of a sudden, the voice, which I only thought of as a parent figure, I thought it didn't have a gender for me yet. It was just a parent. And it said, you can't stay. You're not done. Light's gone. Like, it was so sudden. And I guess they found a way for me to go back to my body. I don't know, but it was sure sudden. And my instant impulse was, no. I did not want to leave. I did not want and the light was gone, and I just wanted it back so bad. And, I've heard other people take this part of my story and twist it. But what I know is that I wished that I could kick and scream and kick the parent in the shin. I wished that I were a toddler who could pound the ground and so on. But there's no space there. There's no ground to pound, and you don't got fists. It doesn't work like that. Anyway, I had this rage because I was passing back into my body. I didn't know that. But to get back into the body, your vibration has to drop. And I felt a sense of falling. And then I felt a sense of fear and sense of rage. And these are the things that make us distinct spiritually. It's this little film of rage and fear that cuts us off from other people to keep us separate. Otherwise, we'd be completely aware of the spiritual world and we would never evolve. I mean, our species would not have, because we'd all be eaten by tigers. Anyway, I'll get into that later. But I was back. My transition to the body took a while. At first, I was seeing sort of stick figures on a blackboard, and they were doing little cartwheels and going on swing sets and teeter-totters and saying these little nonsense rhymes. And then one of them got closer to me, and his face filled in. Instead of being like a chalk figure, it was solid. And instead of saying a rhyme, he was saying, "How many fingers? What is your name?" I had been contentedly watching these figures, just thinking, okay, the parent gave me this kind of show, like a cartoon show or something, that I can watch until I get to go back to the light. So I was going back. And when he said, "How many fingers? What is your name?" I remembered the world. And I remembered, and I realized that my thought was, I am back in the meat puppet. And it was this most horrible, claustrophobic, disappointing feeling to be back to this thing that I had been liberated from. And I began to realize he had expectations that he was going to make some sounds with some stuff in his throat, and I was supposed to make some sounds with some stuff in my throat, and that was code, and that was how we were going to communicate. And I just thought, that is so dumb, because I even a little taste of telecommunication and you know, I mean, telepathic communication, and you don't want to go back to making sounds. So I finally was like, okay, I guess there's no way out of this. So I'll just say two, and I'll say Louisa. And then I became aware of my surroundings, and basically there was a huge crowd around because I had a cardiac arrest and a grand mal seizure. And I don't know what happened during those, I guess it was 3.5 minutes I was gone, but I know it had been frightening for them. When I'll just fast forward to we went outside, I had the mentality of a 5-year-old. I did have like not brain damage, but I wasn't my full adult self. I was this kind of childlike version of me. And we were sitting on a bench outside, but I was already still cool again. I was already smoking a cigarette. And then the bartender came up and talked to my date, and I kind of thought, that's weird. How do they know each other? You know, what are they talking about? Then I realized they were talking about me, and my friend was saying that he had been telling the bartender to give up because the bartender had been giving me CPR that whole time, and it was doing nothing. And I had gone from pale to gray to turning black or whatever happens, you know, and he just wanted to cover the body. He did not want to see it anymore. So he had told him, you know, it's not working, but the bartender just kept going. And he's the one who opened that window so that the spirits could let me come back to my body. Because I wasn't done. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't learned anything except education stuff, you know, in this life. But he came to talk to me, and he said, you know, for a while there, we didn't think you were coming back. You were gone a long time. And I just thought, oh, look, he's bald, kind of, and he's got to be over 30. That's so embarrassing. He had his mouth on my mouth. That's what I thought. And so I just kind of went like, yeah, thanks. And, you know, how many years have I wished I could find that man to thank him? How many years have I thought about that he gave me my son, he gave me my kitten, he gave me everything, every joy that I've had in this life since then, since I've learned how to live. He gave me that chance to learn how to live, and I never thanked him. So one time I was really, really trying to find him, and I called every number I could find for Peppermint Lounge, and finally a janitor answered, and he listened to my whole story. And after I'd finished, he said, you know, I think that man know he done a good thing that day. And he said, you don't have to thank him, he knows. So that helped me. But in any case, we didn't go to the hospital because I eventually asked my friend, what are we waiting for? He said, an ambulance. I was like, cool. that'll be fun to see an ambulance. And then I realized it was for me. And I was like, no, my parents, they are not going to hear that I was doing coke. I still thought it was cocaine. And so my friend, being a private school teacher, did not want any of this happening either. And so he just grabbed my hand and pulled me away from the bench. And in those days, there were tons of cabs out in front. And we got in one. He said, drive, just drive, like they do in the movies. And everybody came running and pounded on the trunk. And I was like, why are they pounding on the trunk? Like, because they were saying she needs to go to the hospital, dude. And I thought it was a game. I don't know. We drove to my apartment, and I can tell you more about what happened, but I'll jump ahead again to the next morning. I had a talk with my roommate, and I told her what had happened for me. And she got to the part where I was being held by the figure, and she asked me directly, she said, so was that God? And I still atheist me, but I knew that she had hit on something. And I didn't think it was God, but I felt it was God or something. And I just laughed and said, yeah, it was God. And like, wasn't going to go there. And I went in our room. We had a little 1-bedroom, and I sat on the floor trying to write the whole thing down. And I had to just think about, this was not a dream. I know what dreams are like. This was not a dream. And I said, well, if it was real and I crossed over, then that means that the religious people are right, and I'll have to start going to church, and I'll have to be all churchy and read the Bible and, just be some goody and lose all my friends and not drink. And I just thought, I can't do that. I mean, think of how hard it is now for someone who is a Democrat to imagine being a Republican, someone who is a Republican to imagine reversing your views on everything. But this is about your fundamental ideas of how the universe works. I'm being asked to change that. And it also means that everything I believed is wrong. And I just said, not doing that. Not doing that. And most near-death experiencers, they transform. They begin to just, especially if you can hear that what you had has a name, has happened to other people. I thought I was the only person in the world that this had happened to. So if I said I had crossed over to death and returned from death, I was saying I was frickin' Jesus or somebody. I had this great sense of like, who are you to claim that you came back from death? And I just wasn't going to do it. So I chose to continue as best I could with my life. And I'm going to just pause there for questions from you, Heather.
Your story is fantastic. And really what I want to hear are some of the other almost paranormal experiences that
Not almost paranormal.
That convinced you, because I'm just like, if this didn't convince you, my gosh, what will?
Yeah. Well, my story that I had made up is very similar to what a lot of the near-death brain researchers today come up with. What I thought of was that as my brain had less and less oxygen, because I knew I'd had a cardiac arrest, that as my functions of my brain shut down, it finally came down to just this one little spark, which was love. And that was kind of at the core of my being. And it seemed really, really bright because it was all that was left. But then I was like, yeah, but what about like when he said you can't stay, and that came totally out of left field? And what about, he said you're not done yet. And other parts of it that I could remember, the moment when he said more real than anything back there. I was like, how does that fit in with your little dying brain theory? And I was like, oh, let's just not worry about it. Let's just not think about that.
Do you now think that was God?
Oh, that was Ignacio. that was, so I have my book written, and here he is represented right here in the book. And he is God's emissary to me. So basically God and Ignacio are directly connected, and Ignacio is connected to me. I call him Ignacio because during the pandemic, I was talking to him so much and I was calling him Angel. And I just one day said, like, I don't know how we know each other from previous lives, if you were like my dad or my husband or my, what, but I can't keep calling you Angel. And so what is your name? So I was thinking, okay, let's go with like Gabriel or Michael or, something like that. And what he said was, he kind of like, I can feel when he kind of sighs and he says, I have had so many names in so many lifetimes, and none of them are in alphabets that you know.
Wow.
And that came out of left field for me.
Wow.
I know. So I said, well, just give me one of the most recent that's closest to me. And he's like, okay. So I sat down to meditate and I just focused. And he showed me an I, and next to it was a small letter G. And so I'm going, Iggy. I only know Iggy Pop. Sorry. That's what I said. And he's kind of like with charades. He's like, yes, you're close. What is Iggy's name? And I'm like, Ignacio. And so then there's a capital E shows up below the I, and he starts to kind of move it up to take the place of the I. So then I'm like, Ignacio. And then he's like, that'll do. Because on the other side, you don't need names. There is no purpose for nouns or names, or because of telepathy, right? Who am I? I'm me. Who are you? You're you. We know. We don't need a name, right? What happened to me after deciding that none of this was real and I was going to continue with my life was I got very depressed. I think something does happen to your brain when you die, just physically, a lot of people get depressed. And I moved away from New York City to Boston, and I became an aerobics instructor with my master's degree in English, and and we did a lot of cocaine. The aerobics instructors do, so I'd learned a whole lot. And we went to the house of the bookkeeper from our fitness club. She had a house on the beach in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And I was falling in love with another aerobics instructor because I also had a kind of love addiction. I was always going from one person to the next. And so I had married my college boyfriend, but he was no fun anymore. Because he was just a human. He wasn't a god, which I had made him into. So I know I was trying to make a new person, put the magic mantle on this woman from in the aerobics gang, but her boyfriend was there. And so I was like, I'm in such despair, and woke up in the morning and there was a storm happening. And I thought, I'm going to go out in the storm and I'm going to be just like King Lear. And I'm going to just rage at the fates that I can't be with my true love. And anyway, so I put on all the rain gear that they have. And as soon as I stepped out, I was like, this might have been a mistake. Cause it was like in my face rain. But then I'm like, no, King Lear did it. I'll do it. And so I walked down on the beach and I walked for a ways, and it was so stormy that like you couldn't see where the sea ended and the sky began, and you could not see very far. And in the distance, I began to see that I had walked past where there were any more houses, and there was a big bog on my left, and coming out of the dunes there was a man. And I saw he was very well dressed for the weather. He had on, a whole rain gear. And as I got closer, I began to see, wait a minute, that's not nylon. He's got on old school Macintosh rubberized cloth. And he's got a yellow hat, and he's got a yellow jacket, and he's got the black boots, and he's basically just Mr. Fish Sticks. And this was 1986, 87. So 5 years after my near-death experience. And it was super Madonna time. So I liked the vintage clothes, vintage everything. And I went to vintage stores and I thought, I bet he got this at some really cool vintage clothing store. I'm going to ask him. Got closer to him and I could see he's looking at the horizon like this. And I'm looking, wait, there is no horizon. What is he looking at? And he's all like this. And I think the guy's not going to want to talk about vintage clothing stores. He's really upset about something. And I got closer still. I could see he had a lot of broken blood vessels in his nose. And I thought, okay, this guy drinks. And just as before I passed behind him, just before I lost sight of him, I said, hey, how's it going? And I saw his eye move a little bit and then he was out of my vision. And I walked on a few more steps and he didn't answer. And I just thought, what a jerk, man. We're both crazy enough to be out in this storm, the only two people here, and he's too cool to say hi to me. So I whipped around and he wasn't there. And so I went through a lot of thinking about what could have happened, looked for his hat to rise in case somehow this old guy had managed to dash down to the water to commit suicide, which was maybe why he was looking so upset. No hat came up. He couldn't have run uphill to the dunes. He was too freaking old. And so I thought, okay, I'll figure this out. I went back to find his tracks and there weren't any. There were only my tracks. So I turned around and went home and screw King Lear, something really weird has happened to me. And I got back and by then everybody else was awake and the host just said, yeah, this is Gloucester. If you go downtown, there's a name with hundreds of drowned people's, sailors' names on it. And you saw a ghost. And I was not having it. Just not having it. What I felt was angry that like, the law of object permanence had been broken and I didn't understand how that could happen. And I was not going to go for this cheap ghost thing. But then my only other alternative was that I was nuts. I didn't like that alternative either. So I decided the best thing to do with this whole experience would be to stuff it in the same bag with the near-death experience. So then it was another 5 years before the next one. So this is like, let me think. Yeah, it's about 5 years later. I just knew from the moment I heard that my brother's wife was pregnant that the baby was going to die. And I tried so hard to convince myself that I was just worried. I tried so hard to convince myself that I was just being somehow negative, paranoid, pessimistic, but anytime, so my family was not very healthy, so I would mostly just hear from my mom what was going on with my brother, and she would say, yeah, they're going out to buy the crib today, and I thought, don't buy the crib, because when the baby dies, you're going to have to take it down, and it will be so painful. Mostly what I knew was my brother's pain. Mostly what I knew was I didn't know how the baby was going to die. I didn't know when the baby was going to die, but I knew that my brother was going to fall into this deep pit of pain and I could already feel the pain myself. So the day before the baby was supposed to come, when she was first starting to dilate, my sister and I went out for lunch and we went to this place called Happy Teriyaki. And I just thought how ironic that he's so happy today and tomorrow he's going to fall. And I remember we said goodbye and I thought, you've got to tell him, you've got to tell him, you've got to tell him. And I was looking at the steering wheel of my car. He had just gotten into his car and I was like, what can I do? Can I jump up? I actually visualized pounding on his window and then saying, your baby's going to die. I don't know how. I don't know when. I don't know why. I just know the baby's going to die. And I was like, I can't do that. I mean, because imagine you're wrong. What a weirdo you'd be, right? And so the next morning when the phone rang, I knew it was him. And when I answered the phone and he said the baby had died, I felt so guilty because I wanted to just be feeling the pain and the sympathy for my brother. But this huge buzzing thing was going on in my head. Like, you knew it's another one of those weird things that's happened. Like there's something weird with you. And again, how could I say I knew the future without thinking I was completely grandiose? So I said, I'm never telling anybody this. And I tried to sweep that away. So the next one is the moment when Ignacio spoke to me directly. So I had been drinking. My drinking had gotten worse and worse and worse. I had left a job I had been teaching for a while, and I left that job, I had crossed the country. I was with that aerobics instructor, and we had bought a house out in unincorporated Thurston County, and I was dumping her for the next guy. So she didn't work anymore. So now I was on to this really cool barista who worked with me at this espresso shop. And I was looking for him everywhere, going to parties and getting drunk. And I got so drunk at this one party that I just kept falling down, and people would stand me up and I'd keep falling down. And anyway, a couple of my friends took me to a house nearby. They put me in a bed and they said, you can't drive. Just sleep it off. But I didn't fall asleep. I woke up. Found my keys where they'd left them on the table. I could not find the ignition for the longest time. I was just trying and trying, and finally somehow started the car, drove off so drunk, blaring the music, smoking cigarettes, going 80 miles an hour on these curves through the woods. And by that time, the alcohol had worked its magic on me, as it does on all of us eventually, to the point where you just want to die. You just don't want to live anymore. The alcohol is not cutting through the pain of being you anymore. Plus, it has distorted your brain so that you don't have any more freaking dopamine receptors, and life was torture for me. And I just thought, either I can die or I can splatter my brains on something, or at least be incapacitated enough that I can't live without assistance. Somebody will have to feed me with a spoon, and I won't have to show up anymore. So I came to this bridge, and it was narrow. It was going over railroad tracks, and it had the reflector signs. And I was so wasted that they seemed to go all the way across it. And I just thought, screw it, I'll just shoot for the middle. So I just accelerated and shot for the middle and got through. And I thought, ha 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 ha. And then I got to my house and I got out of the car. I was too drunk to stand out holding the door, but I looked up at the sky, and it was a big starry night. And my thought was, I am such a badass when I drive drunk. And then Ignacio was shouting at me through this big shell of ego and yucky. I mean, I'd grown back all of my green slime, I'll tell you that. And he yelled through it 2 messages. And people talk about like that they will unpack further. But what he said was 2 distinct things. One was, this is the last time I can help you. And the other was, you do know right from wrong. And it took me a month after that before I really hit bottom. And I went to my first AA meeting on January 29th, 1995. And I have not had a drink since. But what he did was, first of all, plant this idea that he had been helping me, that if left to my own just desserts or just not having his help, I would have killed myself a lot of times by now. And second, I would scrawl all of this garbage that you write in your journal about the dude that I was crazy about. And, I was talking about flinging myself at him and just saying there is no right, there is no wrong. These are inventions created by the hive mind to maintain ethical behavior among the masses. And it's just, there's no such thing. And so he was like, he sees what I write. He sees what I'm thinking, And so he really needed to say, you do know right from wrong. Now, try like just drinking and getting wasted for no reason when someone has told you, you do know right from wrong. It just keeps coming back and coming back. And, basically when I went to AA, I was given what we call, a roadmap for living, a way to live. And one of the common phrases we use is to do the next right thing. Don't worry about everything, just what is the next right thing. And he had started to give me a little bit of that compass, It took a long time for me to learn how to live it was a very slow process. I almost relapsed. And when I was about to get ready to relapse, my sister was going to throw this vodka slamming party, and she had invited the guy that I was obsessed with, and I wanted to go. So I bought all this new near beer. And then I got out of my car back at my house in the woods, and my dog ran out and was hit by a truck and killed. And when I was kneeling by her body and I could see she was still alive, but the blood was trickling out from her mouth, and she was paralyzed, going along the pavement. And he zoomed in on it and he said, "This is you. Blood meets pavement. Physical things are real. We cannot change them. And you are going to die this way if you don't cut the bullshit." And then I was like, well, what else is there? And he showed me this Pied Piper with a trail of people following, and it was me and all my cool wannabe friends. And he showed me he was leading me to a cliff. And he said, "You are following this imagined specter of coolness, and you will follow it till death." And I was like, well, if I'm not going to be cool, what is there? What else is there to follow? And he just said, "There's something else. Be patient." There are many times that Ignacio has spoken to me, and I do outline them all in my book. But he warned me when I was going to go at an intersection and there was a car speeding through it. And he showed a lot of these things would happen, and I would know they were real while they were happening. And then after they were over, I would again try to explain them with a materialist view. So when my sister was dying, he told me that she was blocked from crossing. I could feel our ancestors were pooling in this light above her body in the hospital. But he said, "She's afraid. You need to tell her about the light, help her cross." And so I didn't listen. This was in 1997, so 2 years sober. But it still wasn't ready. And I just kept saying, no, the doctor says she has 2 weeks to live. And he just reminded me. Anyway, I can't tell the whole story, but I eventually just said, okay, I'll do it. And I knelt down by her and I described the light to her in her terms, not my terms, because she was Catholic and she believed in Jesus. So I said, "Jesus will be with you, and you'll be folded in his love, and it will be warm." And you know that she'd done a wonderful job in her life. And then she hemorrhaged and died 20 minutes later. And I was screaming with my brother, running all over the hospital, trying to get help for her. And the doctor came and put a stethoscope on her and said, her heart is still going, but it will stop as soon as it runs out of oxygen. And I wanted to grab the little doctor and strangle her because she wasn't helping my sister. I was filled with, why aren't you doing something? And then my sister, I began to feel her floating above us. And I had never heard of this stuff, Heather. I had never heard of this. Hovering near the ceiling tiles, which is where they hover. And she was filling me with love, and she just washed away all that rage. And she filled me with what I would just call is like a remembrance of the light. She brought it back to the point where I could feel it like in my cells. I remember sitting there and going, "Oh my God, this is so wonderful." And she communicated with me that she needed me to go and tell her youngest son something. But my biggest problem was keeping the joy off my face, because I didn't even look at that thing on the bed anymore. She wasn't there. She was in this light. And I did go tell her son what she had asked me. Then there was another one where a dream became true, and it was that one, which extended over a year, that finally made me come out to myself. And by then, I think I had heard of the term near-death experiencer, but I, to myself, decided this was real, and never again was I going to try to explain it away. But I wasn't going to tell anybody either, because you all would think I was nuts, right? That was in 2005. I don't think anybody really would have thought I was nuts. Well, a lot of people would have, but you know, there was already a movement happening in 2005. I just didn't know about it. You know, I mean, people have been doing this stuff for decades and decades, talking about it, writing about it, developing theories about it, but it was not part of my world. And then I finally connected with ions, and all the different people in my story that I'd had clairvoyant experiences with or about came to hear me speak. And I began to interview near-death experiencers for Seattle Ions. And I write them up in the newsletter every 2 months, another person's. And so that has has given me context. I would say my near-death experience is kind of a baby one. I didn't get very far. I just got to Ignacio. I know people who've met their guide and then their guide's like, hey, let's go meet God. That didn't happen for me. I know people who've seen the earth in space. I only saw the light. I didn't get very far. But I just feel so blessed that Ignacio just never gave up on me, that when I was throwing my life away, he saw the potential that I could become the person that I am now, and hopefully the person that I'm going to become. And he yelled at me. He broke through. I mean, he's got to be a very powerful angel to get through as much ego and static and grossness as was surrounding me then. And he also connected me to the mother of my son, the other mother of my son, because she was sober. And it was because of starting a codependent relationship with her that I went to AA and stayed sober. So in other words, he has guided me. And then in AA, I learned all the things my parents never taught me. Everything I needed. I love AA. I still go. So Ignacio just had me I'll shut up after this. I promise, Heather. I was living my life in Seattle, where I'd lived for 25 years. And all of a sudden, Ignacio was like, you're moving to Oregon. You're moving to the Oregon coast. I'm like, what, where, what? And so I pretty much was going to move when my mother died, but my mother was showing no signs of dying. She was like 95, 96, 97. So I said, well, I'm going to just start getting my house ready and I'm going to move, when she turns 100, no matter what. But my house was kind of a fixer-upper. So I fixed it up. I made it work. Things happened, putting it on the market at a time when there was nothing, having a contingency deal where I told him I would sell my house in 3 weeks. Like everything magically fell into place. Then my mother had died what was it, month before? No, a year before, I'm sorry. And her will was hung up in probate. And I was short of the money I needed for this house. And the money came through probate with 6 hours to spare for me to get this house. So now where I am now, I wish I could show you. Everywhere I look, I am in a beautiful house that is like, I think of it like a luxury tent in the wilderness. I have 5 acres of land, 5 acres of land on one side, 5 acres of land on the other side to the next neighbor. And then behind me is state forest land that goes on and on. I am in a like one person per, I don't know how many acres. I'm in the wilderness. There's bears, there's wolves.
It sounds incredible.
Yeah. And it's being surrounded by all this life. It's the next stage for me, and making all these new connections and deciding how to use this land to help other alcoholics. I want to make a kind of big playground with like rope swings and swings and tree houses and things like that. And just once a year, have a bunch of alcoholics come camp out here and just get well.
Louisa, your story is so incredible and you've turned your life around in so many wonderful ways. I have really enjoyed your story, and there's so much to it. And I've loved hearing all of the things that happened to you afterwards. And finally, it got in your head that you had a near-death experience. So it's been wonderful. And I think people may want to check out your book because there's so much to your story. And I was telling you before we came on that your cover is just absolutely beautiful.
I painted that around the time that I saw the ghost. And it's me not happy with who I am inside. So, yeah. So the book tells my whole story. I have another book that is just my story, the story of my alcoholism from when I was a kid to uh, right about the time I first went to IANS.
I will have links to those in the description. I have to ask too, are you happy now with what's inside of you?
Oh my goodness. I could never have dreamed that it would feel so good to just be, I mean, and I just, I have a friend who's coming to see me in a couple weeks. She's dying. She just found out in January, and she only has a few months, and she's kind of taking a tour of people she loves. And it's up to her what we talk about, but I know that we live again and again, and we put on different body clothes and we live a life, and then we take them off and we are free for a while. Then we put on other body clothes and we do it again. And we are building something. We're learning something. We're growing toward love, growing toward choosing love. And I'm so sad that she also has to deal with all that our culture says about death. I mean, I do know that dying sucks, but death is wonderful. Dying is probably going to suck. But if we had a greater understanding that this is just one life and we should do the best we can with it, it would make it so much easier for her and everybody else when they get to their time.
I believe you and my other guests that I've had on, you are making it easier for people that are facing death or people that have lost a loved one and they're wondering, what happened to them. So I do think that you're making a big difference in this world.
Well, thanks, Heather. I think you are by doing your show.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. If there's one thing that you would like to leave our audience with today, what would that be?
I guess it's just to understand that you are on a path that you can either move forward on or you can just stay right where you are. And that the more you question, what does that mean? Do the next right thing. How can I make my life more meaningful? What do I love? Who do I love? How can I love more? How do I become a kinder person? I mean, I've said it a million times, but the goal is to just love more. If you need to just start with your kitten, start with your kitten, but then see if you can see the kitten in everybody else, see if you can spark the same love toward strangers, toward not just the people in your circle, but everyone. And when that happens, it's a beautiful thing.
That is beautiful advice for us. Thank you so much, Louisa. I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've been an absolute delight, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad we connected.
Same here. What an interesting story. I mean, so many fascinating experiences. She had her near-death experience, and then Louisa had all of these others set up, I think, just to convince her of the reality of her original near-death experience and just to teach her that there's so much more beyond this world. And of course, that's something we've heard from so many of my guests, that there really are incredible things that we can't even imagine. I would love to know your thoughts, whether it's something about her near-death experience, which was unique compared to other near-death experiences. I mean, they're all unique, but it was a little bit different. She had some very Earth-like things, and yet they weren't Earth-like because she was able to dive into the ocean and go into the sun. So share your thoughts on that, or then some of the other experiences that were kind of set up for her, or her guide finally saying, hey, wake up, I can't keep doing this for you, and telling her that she knew right from wrong. I really enjoyed hearing about all of these experiences, and I hope you did too. So just jot down some of your thoughts on some of the things that you just heard. I'd really appreciate that if you could do that in the comments. It makes a big difference to this channel. And so even if you write something as simple as "I made it to the end," that makes a big difference. So thank you for that. And also, I'd really appreciate if you could give it a like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and just double check to make sure you are subscribed. The other thing you can do is share it with a friend. I'd love to have you spread the word, help me out that way. You could share a link or just mention my podcast to somebody. That's always very helpful. I do have a couple of new ways you can support me, and this is, only if it's something you want to do, but I have a shop now. So either go to the word store. If you're looking at it, I think on your computer, it might say store off to the side. On your phone, it might be right below you. You'll see a store or a shop, it might be called. So look there. There are t-shirts and things if you want to pick anything up. Again, no obligation. The other thing I have now are memberships. Still trying to figure out a little bit of that, some of the details, but I would love to have you come in on the ground floor and join and become a member. But again, no obligation. So totally up to you. You are always welcome here no matter what. And I'm always grateful for you no matter what. I'm just coming here week after week really means a lot to me. If you want to find out more about Louisa's books, I will have a link in the description. Where is the description? It's right under this. You can see the title and it'll say the word more. Just click on the word more. That opens it up. And then if you click another word more, it just expands it even bigger. So that's where you'll find a link to not only her book, but all of the books that guests have talked about on my show. You can find that through that link. And then also have a link there to all of my other episodes that I've shot with other guests. And there are just so many amazing people. So I always encourage you to go back and look at some of the other guests that I've had, because there truly are just amazing stories that people have shared. And then make sure to keep coming back. I have a new episode coming out every single week. Right now, they're coming out on Thursdays. And I am going to have so many amazing guests coming up in the fall, also into the winter, into 2026, because I always find great guests at the IONS conference. So you're going to hear from those guests in the coming weeks and months, and I'm very excited about that. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I am always very grateful for you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.